Welcome to the part 2 of the discussion lecture about communication. Again, this is lovely Luar Perez, your lecturer for today. Now let's briefly discuss what is communication breakdown. Communication breakdown means failure of the human communication system resulting from different types of barriers that prevent communication to take place. Barriers to communication can be physical or psychological. An example of physical barrier to communication is the geographic distance between the sender and the receivers. Communication is generally easier over shorter distances as more communication channels are available and less technology is required. On the other hand, examples of psychological barrier are personal barriers to communication. These are factors which are personal that negatively impact effective communication. A personal barrier is a result of experiences or factors such as attitude, emotion, and behavior. Let's take a look on the different barriers to effective communication. Barriers to effective communication could be originating from the source. For example, using of a language that cannot be easily understood or understand by the receiver. Inflections can be also a barrier to communication if there is a bias in which information should be given emphasis. And also, bias when personal interests are involved. The source might select the information that is advantageous or in line with his or her personal interest. Another is that emotions, when the source has a problem and he or she cannot communicate well. And also wordiness. If the source tends to speak a lot, and the result is that the very important information were not explained or relayed well. Now, let's take a look on this exchange of communication between a source and a receiver. Let's try to read the communication. Bureau of Standards, Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, I have been in the plumbing business for over 11 years and have found that hydrochloric acid works real fine for cleaning drains. Could you tell me if it's harmless? Sincerely, Tom Brown, the plumber. The Bureau of Standards replied, Mr. Tom Brown, oh dear Mr. Brown, the efficacy of hydrochloric acid is indisputable, but the chlorine residue is incompatible with metallic permanence. Tom Brown replied, Gentlemen, I have your letter of last week and I'm mightily glad you agree with me on the use of hydrochloric acid. See, there is a problem in terms of communication. There is a barrier of communication, which is the use of language. Let's continue. Bureau of Standards replied, Dear Mr. Brown, we wish to inform you we have your letter of last week and advise that we cannot assume responsibility for the production of toxic and noxious residues with hydrochloric acid and further suggest you use an alternate procedure. Tom Brown replied, Gentlemen, I have your most recent letter and I'm happy to find that you still agree with me. Okay, again. There is a barrier to communication, which is the language. Now, the Bureau of Standards replied, Dear Mr. Brown, don't use hydrochloric acid. It eats hell out of the pipes. Now, I hope Mr. Brown understand what the Bureau of Standards want to say. Let me give you another example. Let's try to read this statement and give emphasis on the words or word that is highlighted in red. I didn't say he was a lousy speaker. We are talking about the person. I didn't say he was a lousy speaker. We are talking about whether he or she said that he was a lousy speaker. I didn't say he was a lousy speaker. Now we are talking about if he or she said it, read it, oh, or not. I didn't say he was a lousy speaker. Now we are talking about a person. If that is a he, or is that if that is a person A or person B, we don't know. I didn't say he was a lousy speaker. Now we are talking about the present, the future, or the past. I didn't say he was a lousy speaker. Now we are talking about the characteristic of the speaker being mentioned in the statement. See, the statement could be changed by just selecting which word you give emphasis to it. I didn't say he was a lousy speaker. Now we are talking about the speaker itself. Is he a lousy speaker or not? Are you talking about the way he speaks, the way he writes, the way he does his job? Okay. Now let's take a look on the barriers to effective communication originating from the receiver. We have perception. People interpret or see things differently. So one example is when you are communicating through text or through chat, one might interpret your message differently. Another is preconceived notions. I thought you meant. Well, there is a preconceived notion. Preconceived notion, meaning there is a bias already. Attention. Physically present, mentally absent. You are in a lecture room and the speaker is explaining something. You're there, but your brain is in somewhere else. Or your mind is in somewhere else. Inferences. I thought you said. There is a bias already. Now let's talk about noise. Anything that interferes with or hinders the transmission of reception of a message is a noise. It may either be physical, psychological, semantic, or physiological. Now let's take a look about communication effects. It is the outcome of the communication process. It is the change that takes place in the behavior of the respondent or receiver communication as a result of exposure to stimulus. In extension communication, the desired effect is usually the adoption of an innovation. Now, these are the determinants of communication effects. So, remember this equation. E is equals to SC plus MC plus CC plus RC plus RE. Wherein SC is the characteristic of the source, MC is the characteristic of the message, CC is the characteristics of the channel, RC is the characteristics of the receiver, and RE refers to the resources available to the source and the receiver. Okay? So, moving on, let's talk about the different communication models. So, this is the first one, which is the Laswell's model of the communication process. So, in the Laswell model, we have the who, which is the communicator, says what? This is the message. In which channel? We are talking about the medium in which the message is being sent to the receiver. To whom? We are talking about the receiver. And with what effect? Of course, we are referring to the effect. Laswell's model of communication describes an act of communication by defining who said it, what was said, in what channel it was said, to whom it was said, and with what effect it was said. The next communication model here in this illustration is the Berlow's SMCR model. Berlow's model of communication is outlined into 6 stages. We have the communication source, the encoding of the message, the delivery method of the message, the decoding of the message, and the message receiver. We also have the Shannon-Weaver model. It is a mathematical theory of communication that argues that human communication can be broken down into 6 key concepts. We have the sender, encoder, channel, noise, decoder, and receiver. And last but not the least is the model of Osgood and Schramm's. The Osgood and Schramm model of communication is a circular rather than linear. And experience of the sender, the one who encodes the message, and the experience of the recipient, the one who decodes the message, is involved. Okay, so those are the different models of communication. Now let's relate with each other the elements of diffusion and communication. When we say the source, it is referring to the scientists, technology generators, opinion leaders, and or the change agents. When we say the message, we are talking about the innovation. When we say the channel, we are talking about the different message channels, such as the interpersonal channels and the mass media channels. When we say receiver, we are talking about the community or any social system. And for the effect, we are talking about the changes in knowledge, attitude, or practice of the receiver. So much with the different elements of communication. Now, let's talk about the different extension approaches. Before that, it would be beneficial if we could differentiate these three. The difference between approach, method, and technique. Because these terms are being used interchangeably. So when we say approach, an approach embraces the entire spectrum of the process. It states a point of view, a philosophy, an article of faith. And within an approach, there can be several methods. Now, speaking of method is a procedural or procedure consisting of a series of action arranged logically for the smooth flow of operation. It is the procedure or step-by-step guiding the prospective client. And for the technique, it is a particular trick or strategy or an individual artistry of the teachers or the extension workers. So these are the differences of these three. Okay, moving on, let's proceed in talking about the different extension approaches. You may use the acronym CAPT GFC or CAPT GFC for ease of remembering. For the first letter C, we have the Commodity Specialized Approach or CSA. The general nature is that it is highly specialized and focuses on one expert crop or one aspect of farming. For example, the extension is just focusing on the different technologies about rice or eggplant, or particularly focusing on the fertilization practice of the farmer. And the basic assumption to this approach is that the way to increase productivity and production of a particular commodity is to concentrate on that one grouping extension, with such other functions such as research, input supply, output marketing, credit, and sometimes price protocol will make the whole system productive. The purpose of this approach is the increased production of a particular commodity and sometimes increased utilization of a particular agricultural input. And the program planning in this approach is controlled by the commodity organization. For example, we have the PhilCoA, the Philippine Coconut Authority, meaning the extension approach is focusing on the coconut. Okay. We also, for the implementation, it is carried by a large field staff assigned throughout the country. So the whole country is being considered in terms of this extension approach. And demonstration plots are major techniques. Large demonstration plots are is a major technique used in this kind of extension approach. Now, for the advantages and disadvantages. So these are the advantages of CSA. Technology tends to fit the production problems, and so extension messages tend to be appropriate because of coordination with research and marketing people, and messages tend to be delivered in a timely manner. And this is only focusing on a narrow range of technical concerns. It has higher salary incentives in terms of the extension worker. There is a closer management and supervision, and there could be fewer farmers per extension worker. And because of that, it is easier to monitor and evaluate and relatively more cost effective. However, for the disadvantages, the interests of the farmers may have less priority than those of commodity organization. And it does not provide advisory service to other aspects of farming. The commodity organization may be promoting its commodity even in situations where it is no longer in the national interest to be increasing the production of that particular commodity or to increase the production of that commodity rather. And the measure of success is, of course, increase in yield in total production of the crops being emphasized. The next extension approach is the agricultural extension participatory approach. Its general nature is that it puts responsibility of determining agricultural extension programs in the hands of farmers, making them partners with government organizations and non-government organizations. Its basic assumption is that farming people have much wisdom regarding food production from their land. And what is needed is the participation of farmers in research and related services. And there is a reinforcing effect in group learning and group action. And that extension efficiency is gained by focusing on important points based on expressed needs of farmers. The purpose of this approach is to increase production of farming people, increase consumption, and enhance the quality of life of rural people. In terms of program planning, it is controlled locally, often by farmers' association. In terms of implementation, it features many meetings and discussions of farmers' problems, and exploration or exploring situations with extension officers. For the advantages and disadvantages, first, for the advantages, there is mutually supportive relationship which developed among participants. It has lesser cost and it stimulates increased awareness, confidence, and activity among farm people. For the disadvantages, it has lack of control of program from central government, the difficulty of managing, reporting, and accounting is there, and pressure people might bring on the central units, and the people's influence on personal management like transfer, selection, and promotion could be of a challenge. In terms of a measure for success, the continuity of local extension organizations and the benefits to the community is one. Another is that the extent of participation of key stakeholders in program planning and implementation. Next is we have the project approach. Its general nature is that it has a fixed period of time and it has a very large funding. The basic assumption of this approach is that better results can be achieved in a particular location during a specified time period with large infusion of outside resources, high impact activities carried out under artificial circumstances will have some continuity after outside financial support is no longer available. The purpose of this approach is to demonstrate within the project area what can be accomplished on a relatively short period of time. And another purpose is that to test the validity of alternative extension methods. In terms of program planning, it is controlled by outsiders, with central government, the donor agency, or some combination. In terms of implementation are the following. The flow of good ideas from project to areas outside the project is present. It includes a project management staff, project allowances for the field staff, better transportation, facilities, equipment, and housing than regular government programs. The advantages of this approach is that it focus enables evaluation of effectiveness and sometimes quick results for foreign donor. The novel techniques and the methods can be treated and experimented with within the limits of the project. For the disadvantages, usually it has a too short time period and money provided tends to be more than what is appropriate. There is a presence of double standards. And when money ends, project extension programs most often end also. For the measure of success, we have the increase in yield and total production of the crops being emphasized. Another approach is the training and visit approach. Its general nature is that highly disciplined and patterned with fixed schedules for training of extension workers, short messaging systems, and visits by extension workers to the farmers. For the basic assumption, extension personnel are poorly trained, not up to date, and tended to visit farmers but stay in offices. Management and supervision is not adequate, and two-way communication between research and extension units and between extension staff and farmers can be achieved. The purpose of this approach is to induce farmers to increase production of specified crops. For the program planning, it is centralized, and what to teach and when to teach, it is decided upon by professionals and is delivered down to farmers. And the program planning follows cropping pattern of priority crops. For the implementation of training and visit approach, there is fortnightly training of extension workers and fortnightly visits by extension workers to small groups of farmers or to individual contact farmers. For the advantages, pressure on governments to organize a large number of small agricultural units into one integrated system is present. It brings discipline to the system, and the extension workers become more up to date with information, and there is closer technical supervision. However, for the disadvantages, we have the following: high long-term cost to governments due to expanding size of extension workers, lack of actual two-way communication, technology relevant to farmers are not integrated, lack of flexibility to change programs is needed, and interest the farmers change staff styles of vigorous patterned activities without appropriate rewards. And the measure of success is increase in yield and total production of crops being emphasized. For the general agricultural extension approach, its general nature is a transfer of technology. The basic assumption is that technology and information are available but are not being used by the farmers, and if this could be communicated to farmers, farm practices would be improved. For the purpose, its purpose is to help farmers increase their production. The program planning is controlled by the government, and changes in priority from time to time are made on a national basis with some freedom for local adaptations. For the implementation, it is carried by a large field staff assigned throughout the country, and demonstration plots are the major techniques. For the advantages of this approach, it can interpret national government policies and procedures to the local people. It covers the whole nation, and relatively rapid communication from the ministry or the president level to the rural people. For the disadvantages, it lacks two-way flow of communication. It fails to adjust extension messages to different localities. Field staff are not accountable to rural people, and this approach is expensive and inefficient. For the measure of success, it is increase in national production of the commodities being emphasized in the national program. Another approach is the farming systems development approach. The general nature is that it is interdisciplinary. It involves several scientific disciplines. The basic assumption is that technology, which fits the needs of farmers, particularly the small farmers, is not available and needs to be generated locally. The purpose of this approach is to provide extension persons and through their farm people with research results tailored to meet the needs and interests of local farming systems conditions. For the program planning, it evolves slowly during the process for different climatic farm ecosystem types, since program takes into account a holistic approach to the plants, animals, and the people in each particular location. In terms of control, the control of program are shared jointly by local farmmen and women, extension people, and agricultural researchers. For the implementation, through partnership of research and extension personnel with the local people, taking a systems approach to the farm. It requires research personnel to go to the farm, listen to farmers, and in collaboration with them and the extension personnel, they understand the farm as a system. For the advantages, there is local control of program planning, and it increases relevance of program content and methods to the needs and interests of the clientele. It has higher adoption rates, and there is effective communication between the local people and the extension personnel, and it has lower costs to the central government and the local people. For the disadvantages, there is some degree of difficulty in working in a multidisciplinary team, and there is no quick results in the development of appropriate technology. For the measure of success is that extent to which the farm people adopt technologies developed in the program and continue to use them over time. So, in terms of the measure of success in between the advantages of each of the extension approaches being mentioned, I think this approach is the best so far. Anyway, that's only in my own opinion. For the cost sharing approach, the last approach we will discuss, its basic assumption is that any non-formal education program is more likely to achieve its goals if those who benefit from it share some part of the cost. And program would more likely serve interests of the client if costs are shared between the outside sponsors and inside target groups. And commitment of learners to participate if they pay some parts of the cost. The purpose of this approach is to make funding of agricultural extension affordable and sustainable both at the central and the local levels. For the program planning, It is shared by various levels, paying the cost, but must be responsive to local interests in order to maintain cooperative financial arrangements. For the advantages, some measure of local control of program planning increases the relevance of the program content and methods to the needs of the client. Thus, higher the adoption rates. There is effective communication between local people and extension worker. It has lower costs to the central government and the local people. And local people tend to have strong voice in program planning. For the disadvantages, it is more difficult for the central government to control either the program or the personnel. And the measure of success that farm people's willingness and ability to provide some share of the cost individually or through their local government units. Okay, so much for the different extension approaches. Now, let's briefly discuss extension teaching methods. So, let's first discuss extension teaching methods according to form. We have the written form. So, for the written form, it includes the bulletins, personal letters, news articles, leaflets, and circular. Let's review some of the definitions of these extension teaching methods. For the bulletins, the number of pages for a bulletin ranges from 12 to 20. A bulletin is a written piece of information about several related topics presented in a detailed manner. For personal or individual letter, this one is written by extension worker to a farmer in connection with the extension work. For the leaflet, a leaflet is a single sheet of printed paper or printed matter, and it is made to give an accurate or specific information on a specific topic. How about news article? Can be news article, newsletter, or newspaper. These are periodicals that gives a wide range of information about what is going on in the next door and around. And for the circular letters, the letter is being sent to a group of people by passing it out from one man to other like a circular to pass on a certain information or messages. Well, another form of teaching method aside from written form is that, of course, we have the spoken form. And this include meetings, office calls, radio calls, and farm and home visits. So what is, let us review the definition of those. For farm and home visit, it is direct contact by the extension worker with the farmer or the members of his family at his home or on his farm for a specific purpose. For the office call, it is a call made by a farmer on the extension worker at his office for obtaining information or getting assistance or for developing acquaintance with him. So for the radio call, it is very self-explanatory. We also have another form that is visual or the use of object. This include exhibits, motion pictures, slides, television, posters, and result demonstrations. So let us briefly review or discuss the descriptions of it. An exhibit or exhibition is a systematic display of models, specimens, charts, photographs, pictures, posters, and information. A poster is a visual combination of bold design, color, and message to catch and hold the attention of the passerby long enough to implant or to reinforce the significant idea in his mind. Moreover, A result demonstration is conducted by a farmer, homemaker, or other person under the direct supervision of an extension worker to prove the advantages of a recommended practice or a combination of practices. We have also the combination of the two, the spoken and visual object. It includes demonstrations, slides, meeting involving motion pictures, and visual aids. Now let's look upon the different extension teaching methods according to number of clientele. So we have individual approach models, we have the participatory model, the counseling model, and the diagnosis prescription model. So for the participatory model, the extension agent and the farmer resolve a problem together. For the counseling model, it uses the non-directive technique of having empathy and compassion with the farmer. For the diagnosis prescription model, the problem of the farmer is analyzed by the extension agent and the solution is prescribed. We have the group approach, and this includes method and result demonstration, leadership training, lecture, film forum, program planning, and field meeting. And also the following: symposium, seminar workshop, panel discussion, educational tour, achievement days, group discussion, field days, role playing, extension classes, and camping. Let's discuss some of them, or let's describe some of them. For the symposium, it is a series of speeches on single aspect of a topic, while a panel discussion is a method of teaching in which 4 to 8 persons discuss the assigned topic, problem, issues creatively among themselves in front of an audience. A group discussion is a type of discussion that involves people sharing ideas or activities. Field days, these are special events, as we're in a series of demonstrations, skits, speeches, and other activities focused on a central theme are strung out over the course of a day to promote new practices and bring recognition to successful farmers and agricultural workers in a particular area. For the role playing, in this activity, it involves changing of one's behavior to assume a role, either unconsciously to fill a social role or consciously to act out an adopted role. We also have the mass approach via use of publication that are circulated as the following: circulars, leaflets, pamphlets, and news stories, and others such as posters, radio, television, and film. Mass media serves to create awareness of innovations and stimulation of interest. So that would be all for now. I hope you learned something from this video lecture. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.